Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just echo the comments made by my colleagues here and Senator Heinkamp in particular. You have a very tough job ahead of you if confirmed. We appreciate your willingness to take on this challenge, but it is a challenge that has to be met, particularly in our rural areas. Michigan is an urban state, but it's also an incredibly rural state, particularly in northern Michigan and Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which is a very rural area. And whether it's a retiree waiting for a Social Security check or life-saving prescriptions, this is a very real and a very big deal for folks, which is why I concur with the sentiments that I've heard about the need for postal reform. It's up to us to push this forward, and certainly appreciate Senators Carper, who I think just arrived, Senator Carper, Moran, Heinkamp, Senator McCaskill, thank you for your leadership on this issue. Senator Johnson, I know this is something you want us to focus on as well. We need to make this a priority and move something going forward, and I hope we do that very well. But Senator Heinkamp alluded to this, and something, the kind of complaints that I've been hearing fairly regularly too is how do you balance the very challenging fiscal situation that the Postal Service is in with service, and as you cut service to meet the demands of the fiscal needs, then people become disenchanted with the Postal Service and try to look for other options, and then you get basically on a slippery slope. You cut more services, you lose more business, your revenue goes down, so you have to do more cuts. And so I want to focus on a couple areas that I've been hearing a great deal about, and one of those areas is the consolidation of mail processing centers. That as a result of unrealistic budget requirements, we're concerned that there are going to be 2 more centers in Michigan will be placed on the chopping block, basically. One in the Upper Peninsula near Iron Mountain and another in Lansing that services a great deal of northern Michigan. We had a facility near Kalamazoo in West Michigan close recently, and the pattern of shutting down these processing centers, it seems clear, means that it takes a lot longer for mail to get to places because they're not being processed as quickly with a number of facilities. So I'd like to have each of you tell me, will you weigh in on decisions related to consolidation of mail processing centers, and how are you going to weigh cost savings with customer service given the current situation that you're in? We'll start with you, Mr. Williams, and if we could go down and kind of get a sense, how do you grapple with this challenge? Give us a sense of your decision-making process.
The PIA legislation did a lot of good, particularly in the early years, but it did go on a long time. And as those budget cuts became more extreme, in order to meet our obligations, the downsizing became less measured. The targets of opportunity were all wiped out, and there were a number of targets of opportunity. And we're now down to what needs to be a very scientific process. And I think we can only do it through modeling. We need to understand the universal service, and we need to create a modeled network that will deliver that. I know from my work as the Inspector General before, some of the early analyses efforts for the impact of closure were wrong, and mistakes were made. And some of the mistakes became more frequent as the financial crisis became more serious. So I'm a huge believer in modeling. I don't believe we can close things through professional judgment any longer. Those are all gone. And we need to show you how we're going to do it and give everyone a chance to arrive at the same conclusion that we did, that we now have the model for a network that will deliver on our promises.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Well, I agree with what my colleague is saying today. I guess I'm an optimistic person, and I start on the revenue side first. I think that's where I look before I start doing the cuts, because as a business person, I know that there's a tipping point that if you cut into the muscle, then you lose many other things in an organization. So my predilection would be to start looking on the revenue side to make sure that we are properly charging for our services. I think defining what the universal service means, what Congress means by that, will help us along the way. I have felt the cutbacks personally in the processing centers. I've seen the change in the standard. We need to know what the American people want, what Congress wants, what our stakeholders want.
Thank you. Mr. Tucker?
Yes, I agree that modeling is an area that we need to look at. We need to define that universal service obligation, what it means today, and how do we maintain our service standards in communities across this country. I would look at both revenue and expenses in making decisions, but I think we need to see all of the analytics around how it's going to affect those communities before decisions are made with respect to consolidation or doing some other things.
The strength of any organization is dependent on the people within that organization. So morale, as all three of you know, is incredibly important to having an efficient, well-functioning organization. People have to come to work motivated to do a good job and take pride in their work. And what I have heard on a regular basis is that morale is challenged at the Postal Service. Workers feel that they have too much mandatory overtime. Their opinions aren't listened to. They are not communicated to in terms of some of the decisions that have to be made, sometimes difficult decisions. So in the remaining time, if you briefly could just give me a sense of your vision of how are we going to strengthen the postal workforce and the morale in that workforce, which will be critical to making sure that this organization runs properly. We'll start with you, Mr. Tucker, and then work the other way.
No, morale is key to a strong and committed workforce. I think some of the internal tools that the Postal Service should use, it's internal communications to communicate, some of the issues that we face, some of the opportunities, and bring people in on an incentive basis to help them create the opportunities they want, the income that they're trying to achieve. And I think just information is important to driving morale in any organization.
So where does that rank in your priorities in this, in this new position?
That ranks pretty high because we don't, as I noted in my opening remarks, we have 640,000 people, and that's the number one asset of the Postal Service is our workforce, and to keep a interested and committed workforce is the number one, I think, priority that we should strive to do. Because without the workforce, we can do all of these reform and other issues and still not achieve what we need, because it is the people that's going to make things happen.
Right. Mr. Duncan?
I think the postal employees have a lot to be proud of. Consistently, they have delivered the mail day in, day out. They're consistently ranked as the best government agency, and I think they have a lot to be proud of. On the other hand, they have to have constant communication. And that communication is in the form of education. They have to understand it's up to us. The tone is set at the top by the management of the Postal Board. That's how they work with the union representatives, but also the rank and file, everyday member of the organization. And it's communication. It's constant and consistent communication.
So that'll be one of your priorities?
It has to be one of the priorities of the organization.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Williams?
The last couple of years have been really rough on the Postal Service employees. In response to that, they've risen to the occasion. They were first ones back after 9/11, after Katrina, and their morale has taken a beating, but it is extremely high. It's a very dedicated group, and as Senator McCaskill said, there are 113,000 veterans there, and they bring with it the discipline that they learned to this new job. We downsized very, very fast. It reached a reckless pace. The wheels were coming off the wagon. That can't, and also we focused so much on our problems that we only focus on our problems. And there were some extraordinary accomplishments that we forgot to thank people for. They are our assets. They're 80% of our operation. And we need to take care of them and thank them for what they've done. We need to focus on the successes as well as the problems ahead, and the successes have been enormous. We also kind of inherited a legacy before any of us were on the scene in this. There were labor management problems that went back to the 50s and the 60s that still sort of cast a pall over things. We need to be I'm glad that you mentioned this. It's a big deal, and we never talk about it. And its time has come. We need to address this and make sure that morale remains high and we don't just intuitively rely on it.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate all three of your comments. We do have, it is a strong workforce. They care deeply about their job, but it's important to celebrate them, and it's important to make sure that they're a part of the decision-making process because they do bring a great deal of expertise to the job each and every day. So thank you for your comments.